Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're looking into something a lot of you have been asking about: data governance. Specifically, how it works in Japanese companies.
Yeah.
You sent over some training materials that seem to go way beyond just like the theoretical stuff, you know?
Right.
So we're talking real-world application here, which I think is going to be super valuable for everyone listening.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's really exciting about these materials is they really dive right into the practical stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a bunch of theory. It's like, how do you actually do data governance?
Exactly.
And it even like acknowledges that sometimes even the experts kind of get things mixed up.
Oh, that's refreshing, because I feel like so much of the talk about data governance can be really abstract and head in the clouds. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like, yeah, we need to govern our data, but what does that actually mean?
Exactly. So what's a common misconception that even the experts stumble on?
So one of the biggest ones is the difference between data management and data governance.
Okay.
It's easy to think they're the same thing,
Right.
but they're really quite different.
Okay.
The materials use this great analogy. Data governance is like supervision, while data management is the actual execution.
Okay, I like that.
So data governance is setting the strategy, the rules of the road, if you will,
Uh-huh.
while data management is about actually putting those rules into action.
Okay, I like that. So it's like data governance is the architect designing the building,
Yes,
and data management is the construction crew actually building it.
perfect analogy.
Okay.
And something these materials really emphasize is that data governance isn't some kind of isolated function.
Mm-hmm.
They use this visual called the DEMA wheel
Okay.
to represent all the different areas of data management.
Okay.
And data governance touches on every single one.
Wow.
It's really woven into the fabric of how an organization handles data.
So it's not just a matter of creating like a data governance department and calling it a day. It's
Right.
more about fostering a data-driven culture across the entire organization, I guess.
Precisely.
Okay.
And speaking of organizational structure, the materials outlined how to build a data governance organization
Okay.
without turning everything upside down.
I remember reading about that non-invasive approach.
Yes.
What exactly does that look like?
So it's about working with the existing structures and people
Okay.
rather than imposing a completely new system.
Okay.
So you're identifying individuals who are already acting as data stewards,
Mm-hmm.
maybe informally,
Yeah.
and then you formalize those roles.
Okay.
You're building on what's already there.
That sounds much more manageable.
Right.
Especially in like a fast-paced environment.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about how this all works in the context of like agile development, which is all about speed and flexibility.
Right.
Doesn't that kind of clash with the idea of having a rigid data governance structure?
That's a great point. There's actually a quote from Ken Allen, the former CEO of DHL, comes to mind.
Okay.
He said, "Most strategies are like New Year's resolutions, full of good intent, but lacking execution."
Ooh.
And I've seen that happen so often with data initiatives, right?
Yeah.
They start with these grand plans, but they fail to adapt to the realities on the ground.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
I think we've all seen those projects that get bogged down in bureaucracy and never quite achieve their goals.
Right. But the materials also bring in a quote from Eisenhower who said, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." So it's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between having a clear vision,
Okay.
but also being adaptable enough to adjust as you go.
So you're saying agile data governance is about being strategic but not rigid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the materials break down that strategic thinking process into 3 levels: vision, mission, and strategy.
Okay.
And they provide some really practical examples too, like starting by fixing what's broken as a first step.
Oh, interesting.
I think that resonates with your approach of tackling real-world problems.
Absolutely. I'm also really curious about what they have to say about data silos,
Yeah.
because it's such a common challenge, right?
Huge.
And I'm always interested in like new ways to think about this problem.
For sure.
I think they provide some historical context, right?
They do.
Mhm.
It's fascinating how they trace the evolution of data silos back to technological advancements.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Back in the 1980s, when mainframe systems were the norm,
Mm-hmm.
data was typically more centralized. It was all in one place, which made it easier to manage in some ways.
Yeah, I guess so. But then things started to change with like the rise of client-server architecture, right?
got it.
And the move toward decentralized system.
Exactly. And then the trend towards packaged software in the late 90s added another layer of complexity. So while packaged software often came with its own data models and structures.
Right.
Organizations usually implemented them in a piecemeal fashion.
Right.
And that led to even more data fragmentation.
So it's like every technological advancement, while intended to make things better,
Right.
also brought with it this unintended consequence of creating more data silos.
It's the classic tale of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right.
And then, of course, the rise of cloud computing in the 2010s just accelerated this trend.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
With each department or team adopting their own cloud-based applications. Data became even more dispersed and siloed. You can imagine the headaches it's created for organizations.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking about the frustration of trying to get a complete view of your customers.
Right.
When your customer data is spread across, like my marketing systems, your sales systems, your customer support systems,
Totally.
each with its own definition of what customer means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a potential solution that's starting to gain some traction.
Okay.
Data mesh.
Okay, I've heard the term data mesh thrown around, but I'll admit I'm still a little fuzzy on what it actually is. Can you break it down for me?
Yeah. Think of it as like a fundamentally different way to approach data management.
Okay.
Instead of trying to force all your data into one central location, data mesh embraces the distributed nature of data.
Okay.
Each domain within an organization becomes responsible for managing its own data as a product,
Okay.
making sure it's easy for others to find, access, and understand.
So instead of having one giant data warehouse that tries to be all things to all people,
Right.
each team is empowered to manage their own data,
Yes.
but in a way that makes it accessible to the rest of the organization.
Exactly. It's about creating a network of interconnected data products,
Okay.
each managed by the team that knows it best. Now, it's still early days for data mesh, but there are some really promising case studies out there.
This is already making a lot more sense.
Oh.
But I imagine data mesh comes with its own set of challenges, right?
Oh, yeah.
Implementing something like this across an entire organization can't be easy.
You're right. It's not a magic bullet.
Right.
Data mesh requires careful planning, clear governance, and a real cultural shift towards treating data as a product.
Okay.
But the potential benefits are huge. We'll dive into the challenges and opportunities of data mesh a bit later.
I'm looking forward to that. But before we get too deep into data mesh, let's bring it back to some more immediate steps.
Okay, sure.
The materials talk about focusing on information systems as a starting point for data governance, right?
They suggest an iterative approach, beginning with information systems, and they even highlight a 7-step process for getting started,
Okay.
starting with data collection, and then moving into data discovery and classification.
That sounds like a very systematic approach.
It is.
But I'm guessing it's not just about throwing technology at the problem.
Right.
There's a human element involved as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Data stewards play a critical role here
Okay.
in ensuring that the data is accurately classified and enriched with business context. You can't rely solely on automation. You need that human expertise to ensure the data is truly meaningful.
So it's that combination of machine and human intelligence that seems to be so crucial in data governance.
Very much so.
But what happens once the data has been collected, classified, and verified?
Yeah.
What's the next step in this process?
That's where data management really comes into play.
Okay.
The materials talk about using tools like data warehouses and processes like ETL, ELT, and DBT to really work with this data.
Okay, I'm familiar with data warehouses, but
Yeah.
those other terms are new to me.
Okay.
Can you break those down?
Sure. So ETL stands for extract, transform, load.
Okay.
It's basically a 3-step process for pulling data from different sources, cleaning up, and then loading it into a central location like a data warehouse.
Gotcha.
ELT is similar, but it flips the order.
Okay.
You extract the data, load it into the warehouse, and then transform it.
Huh.
And DBT is a tool that helps you write and manage those data transformations using code,
Okay.
which can be really powerful for complex data manipulations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds like having clear standards and rules is essential for making sure this whole data management process runs smoothly.
Absolutely. And that's where data governance really shines.
Okay.
It provides that framework to ensure data management aligns with the organization's overall goals. It's like having a conductor, orchestrating all the different instruments in an orchestra.
I like that analogy. Now, you mentioned earlier that even with information systems in order,
Right.
data governance can still face some challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. One of the biggest hurdles is data integration.
Okay.
Imagine you've got a well-organized information system, but the data feeding into it is a mess.
Oh, no.
It's inconsistent, it's inaccurate,
Right.
and it's coming from a bunch of different sources that don't talk to each other.
Okay, that's starting to sound familiar.
Yeah.
So even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
those data silos can still creep in and create problems.
They sure can. The materials highlight this issue of inconsistent master data, where different business systems operate independently
Right.
and have their own definitions for things.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to analyze sales data when each department has a different way of tracking customer information.
I can already feel the headache coming on.
Right.
So how do organizations address this challenge of data integration and inconsistent data?
So the materials suggest kind of a two-pronged approach in the short term. They recommend practical steps, like creating a detailed data architecture map,
Okay.
implementing master data management, MDM, to create a single source of truth for key data,
Right.
and really pushing for data standardization across the organization.
So you're laying the foundation for a more unified and consistent approach to data.
Precisely.
Okay.
And for the long term,
Yeah.
they advocate for more fundamental changes, like rethinking data ownership
Okay.
and establishing clear data contracts between different parts of the organization.
Interesting.
It's about creating a culture where everyone understands the importance of data quality and consistency.
It sounds like a combination of like tackling the immediate problems,
Right.
but also setting the stage for a more data-driven culture in the long run.
Exactly.
But how do you prioritize these efforts?
Yeah.
Especially when you're working in an agile environment where things are constantly changing.
Right. So the materials suggest a really cool method
Okay.
using data modeling techniques.
Yeah.
Imagine you have a high-level model of your entire organization's data, kind of like a blueprint.
Right.
This is called an enterprise data model, or EDM,
EDM.
as new projects or initiatives pop up.
Yeah.
You can use this EDM as a guide to prioritize your data governance efforts
Okay.
and make sure everything stays aligned.
So you're constantly referring back to this big picture view of your data,
Yeah.
but you're also flexible enough to adapt to new challenges and priorities.
Exactly. It's a way to be both strategic and agile in your approach to data governance.
I'm really starting to see how this all comes together. Now, before we wrap up this part of the discussion,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to data mesh.
Okay.
You mentioned it earlier as a potential solution to the data silo problem.
Right.
Can you tell me more about how it actually works in practice?
Sure. Let's imagine a company with different departments, like sales, marketing, and product development.
Okay.
Each department has its own data. And traditionally, you might try to centralize all that data into one big data lake.
Right, but we've talked about how that can lead to its own set of challenges.
Exactly. With data mesh, each department would manage its own data as a product.
Okay.
Think of it like a mini data provider within the company. They'd be responsible for ensuring their data is discoverable, accessible, and usable by others in the organization.
So instead of forcing everything into one central location,
Right.
you're embracing the decentralized nature of data
Yes.
and empowering teams to manage their own data while still making it accessible to the rest of the company.
You got it. It's a pretty radical shift in thinking,
Yeah.
but it has the potential to unlock a lot of value.
This is really fascinating stuff. It sounds like data mesh aligns really well with the principles of like agile development
Totally.
and empowering teams that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from centralized control
Mm-hmm.
and embracing a more collaborative and distributed approach to data management.
I'm really starting to see how data mesh could be a game changer for organizations struggling with data silos.
Yeah.
But I imagine it also comes with its own set of like complexities and challenges.
You're right. Implementing data mesh successfully requires careful planning.
Yeah.
And there are definitely some hurdles to overcome,
Okay.
but we'll delve into those in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. But for now, let's take a moment to recap what we've covered so far.
Okay.
We started by talking about the practical steps involved in data management, and then we explored the challenges of data integration and inconsistent data.
Right.
And finally, we got a taste of data mesh as a potential solution to the data silo problem.
We sure did. And it's clear that data governance is a journey, not a destination. It requires constant adaptation, collaboration,
Right.
and a willingness to rethink traditional approaches to data management.
Well said. Now, before we move on,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something. You mentioned that data mesh is still in its early stages.
Right.
But are there any real-world examples of companies that are successfully implementing it? What are they learning from their experiences?
So there are some.
Mm-hmm.
It's still early days for data mesh, but there are some really interesting case studies emerging,
Okay.
especially in industries like finance and tech,
Mm-hmm.
where data is absolutely essential to their operations.
Yeah. Right.
One example that comes to mind is a major insurance company.
Okay.
They were dealing with the classic problem of data silos.
Mm-hmm.
They had different systems for claims processing,
Right.
customer data, risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nightmare trying to get a unified view of their data.
I can only imagine. It sounds like a recipe for inefficiency and frustration.
Oh, totally.
So how did they approach this challenge? Did they go all in on data mesh from the start?
So they actually started with a pilot project
Okay.
focused on a specific area, fraud detection.
Okay.
They realized that by connecting data from different systems,
Mm-hmm.
they could improve their ability to identify and prevent fraudulent claims.
Okay.
So they created a small cross-functional team
Okay.
to manage fraud-related data as a product,
Mm-hmm.
using data mesh principles.
So they treated fraud data as its own self-contained unit. Yeah. Almost like a mini company within the larger organization.
Exactly. They set clear boundaries for this fraud data domain,
Okay.
defined what data was included,
Mm-hmm.
how it was accessed, and how it would be used.
Okay.
They even created a data catalog
Uh-huh.
to make it easy for other teams to discover and understand this data.
That's a really smart approach.
Yeah.
It seems much less daunting than trying to implement data mesh across the entire organization all at once.
Right.
What kind of results did they see?
Well, they were able to significantly improve their fraud detection rates
Okay.
by connecting data from claims,
Mm-hmm.
customer history,
Mm-hmm.
and even external sources.
Wow.
They were able to build more sophisticated models
Okay.
that could identify patterns and anomalies that might indicate fraudulent activity.
That's impressive. So it sounds like data mesh helped them unlock the value of their data
Yes,
in a way that wouldn't have been possible with their old siloed approach.
absolutely. And this success with the fraud detection pilot gave them the confidence to start expanding data mesh to other areas of the business.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about organizations that aren't ready to jump headfirst into data mesh?
Right.
What are some other strategies they can use to address the problem of data silos?
There are a few other approaches that can be effective,
Okay.
and often it's a combination of strategies that works best.
Right.
One common approach is data virtualization.
Okay.
It's like creating a virtual layer on top of your existing data sources,
Uh-huh.
so you can access and query data from multiple systems
Okay.
without having to physically move or replicate the data.
So it's sort of like creating a single unified view of your data without actually having to combine everything into one central location.
Exactly.
Okay.
It could be a good option for organizations that need to improve data access and integration quickly
Mm-hmm.
without a major overhaul of their data infrastructure.
That makes sense. Are there other strategies that organizations are using to, break down data silos?
Another approach is to focus on data standardization.
Okay.
This involves establishing clear definitions,
Mm-hmm.
formats, and rules for how data is collected, stored, and used across the entire organization.
It seems like this would be a huge undertaking,
It can be.
especially for, large organizations with complex data landscapes.
Yeah, it can definitely be a challenge.
Right.
But it's essential for ensuring that everyone is speaking the same language when it comes to data.
Right.
Remember those data stewards we talked about earlier?
Yes.
They play a vital role in defining and enforcing data standards.
Right. They're like the data guardians, making sure everyone is following the rules and using data consistently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you have consistent data,
Yeah.
it's much easier to integrate data from different systems,
Right.
analyze it effectively, and make better decisions.
Right. This conversation has really highlighted how data governance is about so much more than just technology.
For sure.
It's about people,
Mm-hmm.
processes, and creating a culture where data is valued and managed effectively.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And speaking of culture,
Yeah.
you asked earlier about how organizations are building that data-driven culture.
Right.
It really starts with leadership.
Okay.
Leaders need to champion data,
Mm-hmm.
advocate for its use in decision-making,
Right.
and hold teams accountable for managing data responsibly.
It's about leading by example. Right.
Totally.
And showing that data is not just an IT issue.
Right.
It's a strategic asset that everyone needs to be invested in.
It is.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not just about talking the talk. It's about walking the walk. Leaders need to invest in the resources.
Okay.
Technology, people, training.
Yeah.
To support a data-driven culture.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
You need a strong foundation, the right materials, and a skilled team to make it all come together.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And just like building a house.
Yeah.
Building a data-driven culture takes time, effort,
Right.
and a commitment to continuous improvement.
Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground in this deep dive.
I think so too.
We've gone from the nuts and bolts of data management to the challenges of data silos and the promise of new approaches like data mesh.
Right.
And we've explored the human side of data governance, the importance of culture, leadership, and communication.
It's been a fantastic conversation, and I think the key takeaway here is that data governance is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and finding the right strategies and approaches for your organization.
And it's a journey worth taking because
Sure.
in today's world, data is power.
It is.
So organizations that can effectively govern their data are the ones that will be best positioned to thrive in the years to come.
Absolutely. Data governance is no longer a nice to have.
Right.
It's a must have for any organization that wants to make smart decisions, innovate effectively, and create a sustainable future.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has been.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the world of data governance.
It was my pleasure. And to our listeners,
Yes.
thank you for tuning in.
Absolutely.
We hope you found this deep dive informative and thought-provoking.
Until next time, keep diving deep.